this is Dan Anderson coming to you from Stacy's Tavern Museum with another tidbit of Glen Ellyn history. And today we're going to move along the path of how Glen Ellyn got its name after 57 years in 2 different locations and 7 name changes. When we talked last, the town was Danby. The other town was Stacy's Corners, 2 towns a mile apart, gradually growing towards each other. But Danby was growing faster. It had the train station, and so a lot more was happening in Danby, and it became the dominant town. And it was the name of the town for 23 years. Why isn't it still called Danby today? Well, there's an interesting story behind that. During that period, there was a little thing called the Civil War. And most people don't realize it, but Glen Ellyn, then Danby, and surrounding communities and Milton Township in general, was very much involved in the Civil War. We sent 71 of our young men off to fight in that war, which today would be the equivalent relative to our current population of sending over 4,000 youngsters off to fight in a war. So at any rate, we were much involved. The war ended, they came back from the Civil War, and these young men were changed, as you might imagine. In some ways they had matured wonderfully, in other ways not so wonderfully. They brought a lot of bad habits back with them, and they had a reputation for causing trouble. This was a rough and tumble farm town in the 1860s, 1870s. And one of the things they would do is go to farm dances and start hitting on the girlfriends of other guys. And when the guys objected, as you might imagine, the guys from Danby would clear the dance floor with their fists. So it really was not a town with a great reputation. And there's a story that wonderfully illustrates what the reputation of Danby had become. This was a story told by L.C. Cooper, Lawrence C. Cooper. He was a lawyer with the railroad. He was one of the first commuters from Glen Ellyn into Chicago and back. And he told this story about coming out of Chicago one day on the train. And there was a conductor on that train named Bross, a big, brusque guy. And of course, the conductor's job in part was to ask people where they were going so he could charge them the right fare. Well, on this particular day, there was a person on that train who was badly inebriated. He had spent a lot of time in a bar before he got on the train. Bross gets to him and says, "Where are you going?" And the guy looked at him with a slurred voice and says, "I don't know, I'm going to hell." Whereupon Bross said, "Well, if that's the case, I'll put you off at Danby because that's as close as we get." Anyway, the town did not like having this reputation, obviously. So the village fathers, and in those days it was pretty much guys who ran the show, the village fathers decided to change the name from Danby to something else. And the something else they came up with was Prospect Park. Not sure why Prospect Park, but that's what they came up with. So in 1874, they changed the name to Prospect Park, thinking there would be a transformation of the village. Well, the transformation really didn't happen. I think it required more than just a name change. It required those guys from the Civil War to grow up a little bit and so forth. But it was called Prospect Park until the early 1890s. And that is another story which I will tell on another time.
Want to learn more about this and hundreds of other fun and interesting stories from Glen Ellyn's past? Drop by Stacy's Corner Store, located in the Glen Ellyn History Center at 800 North Main Street. Stacy's Corner Store carries a complete selection of books about Glen Ellyn's history. Add them to your library today.